M. Tshisekedi ressemble à un forcené qui se trouve comme par hasard porteur d'une mitraillette dans un stade rempli de spectateurs. Qu'est-ce qu'il faut faire?
Well, the two top leaders of the FCM23, Corneille Nangaa and Bertrand Bisimwa, held a press conference to discuss about the current crisis in Eastern DRC. In that presser, Corneille Nangaa affirmed that the FCM23 is still willing to continue to dialogue with the Kinshasa government in Doha to find a lasting solution in Eastern DRC. However, he said that the Kinshasa government is going away from the signed agreement that was reached upon on 19th of July 2025. He further said that the release of 700 prisoners is key to finding that lasting solution in Eastern DRC. Well, in this video, I'm going to tell you about that factor of the 700 prisoners that the FCM23 wants to be released. Who are these prisoners? Why does the FCM23 keep insisting on these 700 prisoners? As well as, why is the DRC government very hesitant to release these 700 prisoners? Because as things are right now, that is the only debacle between the Kinshasa government and the FCM23 in finding a lasting solution in Eastern DRC. It is the release of the 700 prisoners that is at the center of the dragging of these talks in Doha. Well, this is Bonafide. If you haven't subscribed, kindly subscribe and hit that notification button so that when I release something new on the Eastern DRC crisis, you get notified as soon as possible. Well, both parties, the FCM23 and the Kinshasa government, agree that the Doha process is really important in making sure that there is a lasting peace in Eastern DRC, because both of these parties are still participating in the negotiations in Doha so that they can find that amicable solution for the crisis in Eastern DRC. But one demand has emerged to be very controversial and very challenging for the Kinshasa government to meet, as requested by the FCM23. The request by the M23 that the Kinshasa regime should release 700 prisoners who are M23 supporters, and some are part and parcel of the M23 that were captured by the FARDC in the war between the FARDC and the M23. Now, who are these prisoners? To better understand the prisoners that were captured by the FARDC, it is important to note that the FCM23 includes a political wing called the AFC and a military wing called the M23. Now, the FARDC rounded up anyone who was sympathizing with the AFC or working with the M23 in whatever capacity. So there are military men and women who were captured by the FARDC and are still in prison. There are some politicians who are captured as part of the AFC who are in prison, as well as there are some sympathizers, people in the villages, local people who are sympathizing with the FCM23 motives, perhaps leaking information and such like support for the FCM23, who are also captured by the FARDC, by the Kinshasa regime, and are in prison. These are the people that the FCM23 now wants released from the prisons. And of course, this has proven to be very challenging for the Kinshasa regime because of the magnitude of the request that the FCM23 wants. According to the FCM23, in the deal that was signed on the 19th of July 2025, the release of these 700 prisoners should be unconditional, and that there should be a blanket amnesty for all these 700 prisoners. There should be no follow-up of any kind of sort, that these 700 prisoners will be returned to prison after they have been released. Now, that is something that the Kinshasa regime has been very hesitant to do ever since that agreement was signed. Now, soon after the signing of the Declaration of Principles on the 19th of July 2025, the M23 came out and said that the prisoners that were released by the Kinshasa regime are not the ones that the M23 wanted. In fact, the M23 say that these are not the people who we wanted to be released, as we had that agreement on 19th of July. And therefore, that aspect of prisoners remained, and right now it is haunting both sides, because there has been a dragging of this agreement solely because of the lack of the release of the 700 prisoners who the FCM23 want. Of course, among these 700 prisoners, there are high-stakes prisoners, people who are commanders in the M23, people who are very high-ranking in the AFC, who are held as prisoners, and then there are people who are low-stakes, people who were just villagers. They were leaking information, perhaps doing one or the other to assist the FCM23. And of course, these are the people who can be easily released by the Kinshasa regime without any huge demand by the Kinshasa regime to the AFC/M23. Now, Kinshasa considers the release of these 700 prisoners as a security concern, because the release of these 700 prisoners is going to replenish the ranks in the AFC/M23, both politically as well as militarily. People who are commanders will go back and take their roles. People who are part and parcel of the political movement of the AFC will go back and take their roles. Of course, the AFC/M23 is going to become very, very strong if all these are released. And of course, a strong AFC/M23 is going to be more problem to the Kinshasa regime. The Tshisekedi government is also very much cautious on releasing these 700 prisoners because of the political legitimacy that will follow after. If you release these 700 prisoners, then it goes against the narrative that the AFC/M23 is a terrorist organization that is supported by Rwanda, because then you will be conforming to what the AFC/M23 says. And that means that you will be going against your word that the AFC/M23 is an organization that should not be tolerated in DRC. These 700 prisoners are also held by the Kinshasa regime as a bargaining chip. If the Kinshasa regime requests a withdrawal of a particular village or town, they can give part of the prisoners and say that we are giving you prisoners in exchange, you withdraw from a particular village or town. So the release of all these 700 prisoners without any concession, of course, will make Kinshasa regime to have no bargaining chip against the AFC/M23, and the AFC/M23 will have more leverage over the Kinshasa government. But there are some angles where the Kinshasa regime can negotiate with the AFC/M23 to come up with some agreement on the release of prisoners. One will be through a first or conditional release, where low-level fighters and not commanders will be released first for there to be some kind of goodwill from Kinshasa, and the AFC/M23 will have also to do part of their bargain. And second can be the verification of mechanisms by neutral actors, for example, the Red Cross or the UN or the Qatari mediation can go and verify these prisoners that are being released by the Kinshasa regime, that they are real prisoners who are requested by the AFC/M23, part of the 700. And lastly, the Kinshasa regime can also do an exchange system where particular releases will be done, and then there will be reciprocal steps by the AFC/M23 out of key towns that the Kinshasa regime will want to manage in Eastern DRC. Well, I will continue to keep you informed of the latest of what will come out from the negotiations between the AFC/M23 and the Kinshasa regime in Doha, Qatar, as well as the sentiments that are coming from Corneille Nangaa, Bertrand Bisimwa, as well as the Kinshasa government regarding the situation in Eastern DRC. Keep it bona fide.